The myth of Atlantis. Close your eyes and let your mind drift backward through time. Past yesterday, past last year, past the century that brought you into this world. Keep drifting. Past the age of electricity and engines, past the Renaissance, past the great empires of Rome and Persia, past even the classical world of ancient Greece. Go back 9,000 years before Plato walked the streets of Athens. Go back 11,400 years from this very night, and there, in the mists of deep time, imagine an island, a jewel of civilization rising from the Atlantic Ocean, gleaming with bronze and gold, where canals wound through concentric rings of land and water, where temples touched the sky, where people lived in peace and prosperity under the watchful gaze of the god Poseidon himself. Then, imagine it gone, vanished in a single day and night of catastrophic destruction, swallowed whole by the hungry sea, leaving nothing behind but legend, whisper, and an ache of longing that has haunted humanity for 2,400 years. This is Atlantis, the most famous lost civilization in history, a place that may never have existed outside the imagination of a philosopher, yet feels more real to millions than many actual ancient cities whose ruins we can walk through today. Tonight, we drift into this mystery together, not to solve it, for perhaps it cannot be solved, but to understand why it matters, why we keep searching, and what this eternal hunt for a vanished paradise reveals about the human soul. Before we embark on this journey into the depths, if these quiet explorations bring you peace, a gentle like or soft tap on subscribe would mean everything to me. Your support is what keeps these nocturnal wanderings alive, what allows me to continue crafting these meditations on mystery and meaning. Each small gesture reminds me that somewhere in the darkness, thoughtful souls like you are listening, wondering, seeking the same truths I seek. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. Now, let us begin where all journeys into Atlantis must begin, with the words of the man who first spoke its name into history, the philosopher Plato, sitting in Athens around 360 years before the birth of Christ, putting stylus to papyrus, weaving a story that would echo across millennia and inspire countless expeditions, theories, dreams, and obsessions. Plato's Vision, the original tale. The story of Atlantis comes to us through two of Plato's dialogues, philosophical works structured as conversations between his teacher Socrates and other intellectuals of ancient Athens. These dialogues, titled Timaeus and Critias, were written around 360 BCE, part of a projected trilogy that was never completed. The third dialogue, meant to be spoken by Hermocrates, was possibly never written, and the Critias itself ends abruptly mid-sentence, leaving the tale of Atlantis forever incomplete, a fragment tantalizing us across the centuries. The dramatic setting of these dialogues takes place during a festival in honor of Athena, likely the great Panathenea, around 421 BCE, though some scholars suggest different dates. Four men gather: Socrates, the legendary philosopher; Timaeus, described as an astronomer and mathematician, possibly based on Archytas of Tarentum; Hermocrates, the historical Syracusan general and politician; and Critias, whose identity scholars fiercely debate even today. The character of Critias is particularly significant because he's the one who tells the Atlantis story. Some scholars identify him as Critias the Tyrant, a member of the 30 tyrants who briefly ruled Athens after its defeat in the Peloponnesian War, a man whose association with Socrates would later be used as evidence against the philosopher. Others argue this Critias is actually the tyrant's grandfather, creating enough temporal distance to make the story's transmission more plausible. The debate matters because it affects how we evaluate the story's claimed authenticity. According to Critias, the tale of Atlantis passed through a remarkable chain of transmission across generations. It begins with Solon, the famous Athenian lawgiver and poet who lived from approximately 360-638 to 558 BCE, one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece. Solon, Critias tells us, traveled to Egypt, to the ancient city of Sais in the Nile Delta. There, Egyptian priests, keepers of records stretching back thousands of years, shared with him a story largely forgotten by the Greeks, whose own records had been repeatedly destroyed by floods and fires. The priests told Solon that 9,000 years before his visit, the city of Athens had been the greatest power in the world, embodying the principles of justice and military excellence that Socrates had described in his ideal city. This ancient Athens faced a threat from across the waters, the mighty island empire of Atlantis, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow passage connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis, the priests said, was larger than Libya and Asia combined, though the exact meaning of these geographical terms in ancient texts remains debated. The island was home to a powerful confederation that controlled many other islands in that ocean and even parts of the continent beyond. The Atlantean kings had conquered Libya as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tyrrhenia, essentially modern-day Tuscany in Italy. Emboldened by their successes, they attempted to enslave all the peoples of the Mediterranean, including Athens. But Athens, though standing alone after other Greek cities abandoned the fight, refused to submit. Through courage and military skill, the Athenians defeated the Atlantean invasion, liberating the conquered peoples and pushing back the imperial aggressor. But before Athens could fully savor its victory, catastrophe struck both civilizations. Violent earthquakes and floods destroyed Athens in a single day, and the island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and vanished. This, the priests told Solon, explained why the ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules was unnavigable, choked with shoals of mud from the sunken island. Solon, apparently intending to compose an epic poem about this remarkable history, never completed the work. Instead, he shared the story with Dropides, Critias's great-grandfather, who passed it to his son, also named Critias, who was the grandfather of the Critias appearing in Plato's dialogue. The elder Critias told the story to his grandson when he was about 10 years old during the Akrotiri, a significant Athenian family festival. The boy, now elderly, recalls the tale with perfect clarity and relates it to Socrates and the assembled company. This elaborate chain of transmission, stretching across more than 2 centuries and passing through multiple generations, serves several purposes. It lends the story an air of authenticity, grounding it in historical figures like Solon, while explaining why the tale isn't more widely known. It also distances Plato himself from the narrative, allowing him to present it as received tradition rather than his own invention. In the dialogue Critias, after Timaeus has finished a lengthy discourse on cosmology and the creation of the world, Critias takes his turn to elaborate on the Atlantis story in far greater detail. He describes how, after the gods divided the earth amongst themselves without strife, Poseidon received Atlantis as his portion. The god fell in love with Cleito, a mortal woman, daughter of Evenor and Leucippe, natives of the island. To protect her and their home, Poseidon fashioned the island's distinctive geography. The description that follows is extraordinarily specific. At the center of the island stood a mountain, and on that mountain lived Cleito in her father's dwelling. Poseidon broke the land around this central hill, creating alternating rings of sea and land, 2 of land and 3 of water, perfectly circular and concentric, each equidistant from the center. These rings made the central island inaccessible, as ships and navigation had not yet been invented. Poseidon and Cleito had 5 pairs of twin sons. The eldest, Atlas, became the first king, and the island and the surrounding ocean were named after him. Atlas's brothers ruled as princes over different regions of the island, creating a confederation of related royal families who passed their power down through generations, from firstborn to firstborn, accumulating massive wealth and power over many centuries. The Atlanteans, blessed with divine ancestry, became master engineers and architects. They bridged the rings of water, excavated a great canal from the sea to the outermost ring, and created zones of habitation and magnificent structures. They built a palace at the very center of the island, on the original hill where Poseidon had lived with Cleito. Surrounding it with walls of stone they quarried from the island itself. These stones were naturally varied in color, red, white, and black, and the Atlanteans used this diversity ornamentally, creating buildings of pleasing diversity. The outermost wall was plated with brass, Critias tells us, the next wall with tin, and the innermost wall, which encompassed the Acropolis, with orichalcum, a mysterious metal that sparkled like fire and was apparently mined on the island itself, second in value only to gold. This orichalcum appears nowhere else in ancient literature with quite this description, and countless treasure hunters have wondered whether it was a real metal lost to history or simply Plato's invention. Within the innermost wall stood a temple to Poseidon himself, a stadium in length and 300 feet wide. Its exterior covered entirely in silver except the peaks, which were plated with gold. Inside, the ceiling was ivory, adorned with gold, silver, and orichalcum. The temple housed a massive gold statue of Poseidon standing in a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses, so tall that his head touched the temple's ceiling. Around him stood 100 Nereids, sea nymphs, riding on dolphins. Outside the temple were golden statues of all the original 10 kings and their wives, as well as many other offerings from Atlantean citizens and subject peoples. The palace and surrounding structures were similarly magnificent, with hot and cold springs providing water, and extensive gardens and buildings for various purposes, including gymnasiums, horse racing tracks, and harbors for the island's considerable fleet.
The description continues with remarkable precision. The rings of land and water were exactly measured. The central island was 5 stades in diameter, about 600 feet. The next ring of land, 10 stades, and so on in a precise mathematical pattern. The great canal connecting to the sea was 300 feet wide, 100 feet deep, and 50 stades long. Engineers created tunnels through the rings of land large enough for ships to pass from one ring to the next. The broader island beyond these central features was itself extraordinary. It lay in a level plain, protected by mountains that descended to the sea. This plain, we're told, was oblong, 3,000 stades long, roughly 340 miles, and 2,000 stades wide at its center, positioned toward the south, sheltered from the cold north wind. The mountains surrounding it were celebrated as surpassing all others in number, size, and beauty, containing wealthy villages, rivers, lakes, and meadows, providing food for both domestic and wild animals. The Atlanteans divided this plain into 10,000 military districts, each required to provide a specified number of soldiers, horses, chariots, and equipment for war. The combined military force was staggering: 10,000 chariots, 1,200 ships, and countless infantry, a force with which the island conquered much of the known world. But the Atlanteans weren't merely conquerors. For many generations, Critias tells us, they remained obedient to divine law, possessing true and great spirits. They combined gentleness with wisdom, recognizing that virtue and friendship were more valuable than material wealth. As long as their divine nature flourished, their possessions seemed burdensome rather than sources of pride. But over time, the divine portion of their heritage became diluted. When this divine portion began to fade away in them and became diluted too often and with too much of the mortal admixture, and the human nature got the upper hand, their character changed. To those who could truly see, they became base and corrupt, having lost the fairest of their precious gifts. But to those without discernment, they appeared more glorious than ever, filled with unrighteous avarice and power. Zeus, the god of gods, who rules with law and can see into all things, perceived the corruption of this once honorable race. Wanting to punish them so they might return to virtue, he called all the gods together in his dwelling place at the center of the universe, which, being placed in the center of the world, sees all things that partake of generation. When the gods assembled, Zeus spoke to them. And there the dialogue breaks off. Abruptly, without ceremony or warning. In the middle of a sentence, the story ends. We never learn what Zeus said, never discover what punishment he decreed, never see the final destruction Critias has been building toward. The manuscript simply stops, leaving us suspended in that divine council chamber, waiting for words that never come. Why did Plato never finish? Did advancing age prevent him? Did he lose interest in the project? Did he find the artistic challenge too difficult? Or perhaps more intriguingly, was the abrupt ending itself deliberate? A philosophical choice to leave the story incomplete, much as the real world rarely provides neat conclusions. We cannot know. What we do know is that this unfinished tale has proven more powerful, more enduring, and more influential than many completed works. The incompleteness itself adds to the mystery, inviting us to imagine our own conclusions, to fill the silence with our own visions of what might have been. Take a slow breath. Let Plato's words settle. Imagine that island as he described it, the concentric rings glittering in the sun, the bronze-plated walls, the golden temple roof, the canals filled with ships. Can you see it? Can you hear the voices of the Atlanteans echoing across those plazas, calling to each other in languages now utterly forgotten? Or is it all smoke and shadow, the dream of a philosopher trying to illustrate a point about virtue, corruption, and divine justice? That question has occupied scholars, explorers, and dreamers for 24 centuries, and it's the question we turn to next.
Was Plato writing history or philosophy? The debate over Atlantis begins with a simple question. Did Plato intend his readers to believe the story as literal history, or was he crafting an allegorical tale to illustrate philosophical principles? The answer profoundly shapes how we approach the search for Atlantis, and scholars remain divided to this day. Those who argue for literary invention present compelling evidence. Plato was, first and foremost, a philosopher, not a historian. His dialogues consistently use stories, myths, and allegories to explore abstract concepts like justice, virtue, the nature of reality, and the ideal organization of society. The Republic, his most famous work, describes an ideal city-state in detail, But no one seriously searches for this perfect city as if it were a lost archaeological site. Why then should we treat Atlantis differently? The timing and context of the Timaeus and Critias support this interpretation. In the Republic, Plato had already described his vision of an ideal society, organized according to philosophical principles of justice and harmony. In the Timaeus, Socrates explicitly wishes he could see such a society in action, engaging with external threats rather than remaining an abstract thought experiment. Atlantis, from this perspective, serves as Plato's answer to Socrates' wish, a demonstration of how an ideal Athens might conduct itself in war, defeating a powerful aggressor through virtue rather than mere military might. The story perfectly embodies Plato's philosophical preoccupations. The contrast between virtuous Athens and corrupt Atlantis illustrates his theory of political decline. Initially blessed with divine nature, the Atlanteans gradually fall into vice as the mortal part of their heritage overwhelmed the divine. This mirrors Plato's broader theory that societies inevitably degenerate unless guided by philosophical wisdom and virtue. Atlantis becomes a cautionary tale about hubris, materialism, and the corruption of power. Moreover, the elaborate chain of transmission, from Egyptian priests to Solon to multiple generations of Critias' family, can be read as Plato's way of creating fictional distance and authority. By attributing the story to such ancient and venerable sources, he makes it more difficult to verify or disprove, while simultaneously lending it an air of authenticity. It's a literary technique, these scholars argue, not evidence of actual historical research. The fantastic elements of the description also raise doubts. An island larger than Libya and Asia combined, capable of fielding 1,200 warships and 10,000 chariots, swallowed whole by the sea in a single day and night. Such catastrophes exceed anything in the historical record. The perfect geometric precision of the concentric rings, the walls plated with orichalcum and other metals, the massive temple with its gold-covered ceiling, all seem more like the inventions of imagination than the practical realities of engineering and economics. And perhaps most tellingly, no other ancient source mentions Atlantis. Not the historians Herodotus or Thucydides, who wrote before Plato and carefully documented the peoples and places of the known world. Not the geographers Strabo or Ptolemy, who mapped the Mediterranean and beyond. Not even Aristotle, Plato's own student, who commented extensively on his teacher's work but apparently found Atlantis unworthy of serious historical consideration. For many scholars, this silence speaks volumes. If Atlantis had been real, wouldn't someone else have mentioned it? Yet the case for historical basis isn't easily dismissed. Those who believe Plato drew on real events point to elements in the narrative that seem oddly specific and unnecessary for a purely allegorical tale. Why provide such detailed measurements of the rings, canals, and plain unless describing an actual place? Why mention the distinctive colors of stone quarried from the island? Why include the detail about the ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules being unnavigable due to shoals of mud?
Plato himself, through the character of Critias, repeatedly insists on the story's truth. Listen, Socrates, to a tale which, though strange, is certainly true, having been attested by Solon, who was the wisest of the 7 sages. Critias begins. Throughout the narration, he emphasizes that this is not legend, but actual history, preserved in Egyptian records and passed down through his family. Would Plato have his characters lie so explicitly if the entire thing were acknowledged fiction? The Egyptian setting lends credibility to this view. Egypt's civilization was already ancient by Solon's time, with written records stretching back thousands of years. The Egyptian priests were famous throughout the Mediterranean world as keepers of knowledge, astronomers, mathematicians, and historians.
If any culture might possess records of events 9,000 years past, it would be Egypt. The detail that the Egyptians kept written records, while the Greeks lost theirs repeatedly to disasters like floods and fires, reflects actual historical circumstances. Some scholars note that Plato displays unusual restraint in the Atlantis narrative compared to his more obviously mythological stories. He doesn't populate the tale with gods performing magical acts or heroes accomplishing impossible feats. Apart from Poseidon's initial shaping of the central island and the final divine punishment, the story unfolds on a human scale, describing engineering projects, military campaigns, and political corruption, all things that occur in the real world. Even the measurements, while grand, aren't impossible or physics-defying. The abrupt ending of Critias also puzzles those who see Atlantis as pure invention. If Plato were simply crafting an illustrative tale, why not finish it? Why build so elaborately towards Zeus's pronouncement and then leave it incomplete? Perhaps some suggest Plato encountered information that complicated his narrative, or realized that finishing it would require claims he couldn't justify. Or perhaps his advancing age and other philosophical projects prevented completion. There's also the question of genre. Modern readers might sharply distinguish between history and fiction, but ancient authors didn't always observe such boundaries. Historical writing often included speeches the author admittedly invented, events he reconstructed from fragmented sources, and interpretations shaped by philosophical or political aims. Plato might have been working with real historical traditions, embellishing and shaping them to serve his philosophical purposes, without seeing this as dishonest or problematic. The truth may lie somewhere between these positions. Perhaps Plato heard stories of ancient catastrophes, real civilizations destroyed by natural disasters, and wove these fragmentary memories into a narrative framework that served his philosophical agenda. The core might be historical, while the elaborate details are invented. Or perhaps he created Atlantis whole cloth, but based its characteristics on real places and peoples he knew, creating a plausible fiction that felt historically grounded. What we can say with certainty is that Plato's intention, whatever it was, has become almost irrelevant to Atlantis's cultural life. The story he told, whether history or philosophy, or some combination, took on independent existence. It entered human imagination and refused to leave, inspiring century after century of speculation, exploration, and creative interpretation. In a sense, Atlantis became real through the sheer power of belief, not as a physical place, but as an idea that shapes how we think about lost civilizations, golden ages, and the fragility of human achievement. The question, was Atlantis real, might be less important than why do we need it to be real? What does our fascination with this story reveal about human nature, about our relationship with the past, and about the fears and hopes we project onto vanished worlds? These questions guide us as we explore the most famous proposed location for Atlantis, the volcanic island where a Bronze Age civilization truly did disappear in catastrophic destruction, preserved beneath ash, like a Mediterranean Pompeii.
The Santorini connection, Minoan echoes. If you could visit one place that embodies the spirit of Atlantis, the romance and the tragedy of a great civilization destroyed by forces beyond human control, you would go to Santorini. This crescent-shaped island in the southern Aegean Sea, about 70 miles north of Crete, is one of the most visually stunning places on Earth. Whitewashed buildings cling to cliffs overlooking a vast blue caldera where the center of a mountain once stood. At sunset, the sky blazes orange and red, painting the volcanic landscape in colors that seem otherworldly, divine. But Santorini's beauty conceals a violent past. 3,600 years ago, this island, known then as Thera or possibly Strongili, meaning round, was the site of one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in recorded history. The explosion was so massive it ejected an estimated 9.5 to 14.3 cubic miles of material into the atmosphere. The eruption's volcanic explosivity index is estimated at 6 or 7, comparable to the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, which caused the year without a summer and global crop failures. The eruption didn't simply damage the island, it fundamentally transformed it. The mountain's core exploded outward and collapsed inward, creating the massive caldera that defines Santorini's current geography. What had been a circular island became a crescent, with the islands of Therasia and Aspronisi marking other fragments of the original landmass. Where a mountain had towered, the sea now flows, hundreds of feet deep, over the collapsed magma chamber. The explosion generated tsunamis that radiated across the Aegean and eastern Mediterranean. Wave heights would have reached tens of meters near the source, devastating coastal settlements on Crete and other islands. Ash from the eruption fell as far as Egypt and Turkey, over 200 miles away, blanketing regions in darkness and poisoning water sources. The atmospheric effects likely disrupted climate patterns across the northern hemisphere for months or years. And on Thera itself, an entire civilization was buried. At a site called Akrotiri, on the southern part of the island, excavations beginning in 1967 under archaeologist Spiridon Marinatos uncovered a Bronze Age settlement preserved remarkably intact beneath 40 to 60 feet of volcanic ash. The preservation rivals Pompeii, though Akrotiri is far older, dating to approximately 1600 BCE. What the excavations revealed was extraordinary. This was no primitive village, but a sophisticated urban center, part of the Minoan civilization centered on Crete. Multi-story buildings lined paved streets. Advanced plumbing systems with clay pipes brought water and carried away sewage. Storage vessels called pithoi held wine, oil, and grain, and covering the walls of many buildings were stunning frescoes depicting daily life, religious ceremonies, landscapes, and maritime activities. The frescoes alone demonstrate remarkable artistic achievement. One shows ships sailing between ports, their designs revealing advanced naval architecture. Another depicts gatherings of women adorned with elaborate jewelry and cosmetics, their clothes dyed in vibrant colors. A third shows boxers, possibly engaged in ritual sport. Dolphins leap through blue waters, lilies bloom in exquisite detail. The quality of these artworks demonstrate that Akrotiri's inhabitants possessed wealth, leisure, and sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities. Equally impressive are the material goods recovered. Pottery of exceptional quality, both local manufacture and imports from Crete, Cyprus, and even mainland Greece. Bronze tools and weapons of advanced metallurgy. Gold jewelry worked with remarkable skill. Weights and measures indicating standardized trade. All the hallmarks of a prosperous, cosmopolitan society engaged in extensive maritime commerce. Yet one detail makes Akrotiri especially poignant.
no human remains have been found in the excavated areas. Unlike Pompeii, where victims were caught by surprise, the residents of Akrotiri apparently had warning and evacuated. Earthquakes likely preceded the main eruption, giving people time to gather essential possessions and flee. Where they fled, whether they survived, we do not know. But the empty city they left behind, frozen in time, speaks of lives interrupted, of plans never completed, of a society that simply ceased to exist.
The parallels with Plato's Atlantis are tantalizing. Here is an advanced Bronze Age civilization, thriving on an island, engaged in maritime trade and possibly military expansion, destroyed suddenly by volcanic catastrophe and tsunamis. The concentric geography Plato describes could evoke Santorini's pre-eruption shape with its central mountain. The references to hot and cold springs match the volcanic geology. Even the detail about the ocean becoming unnavigable might reflect myths about the ash-choked seas after the eruption. The Minoan civilization, of which Akrotiri was part, certainly fits the profile of an advanced, wealthy society. At its height during the Middle and Late Bronze Age, Minoan Crete and its satellite settlements dominated Aegean trade. The palace complexes at Knossos, Phaistos, and elsewhere demonstrate architectural sophistication, artistic achievement, and administrative complexity. The Minoans developed a writing system, Linear A, which remains undeciphered, and influenced the later Mycenaean Greeks who adopted and adapted Minoan culture. Could stories of the Thera eruption and the Minoan decline have reached Egypt and been preserved there, later filtering through to Solon and eventually Plato? The civilizations were contemporaneous, and the eruption would have had observable effects across the Eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian records might have noted unusual atmospheric phenomena, failed harvests, or disruptions in trade with Aegean peoples. Yet, significant problems undermine the Santorini-Atlantis identification. The most obvious is chronology. Plato places Atlantis's destruction 9,000 years before Solon's time, roughly 11,400 years ago. The Thera eruption occurred around 1600 BCE, about 3,200 years ago. The discrepancy is enormous. Defenders of the theory suggest Plato or his sources confused lunar years with solar years, or that numbers in transmission through multiple languages and scripts became garbled. But these explanations feel ad hoc, attempts to force square pegs into round holes. The geography is also problematic. Plato explicitly places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Aegean Sea. While some argue he meant to describe any large body of water, the specificity of the reference to Gibraltar seems deliberate. Santorini is firmly within the Mediterranean, not beyond it. The scale is wrong too. Plato describes Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined, controlling an empire that stretched from North Africa to Italy. Santorini was a modest-sized island, and while Minoan civilization was impressive, it never approached the scale Plato attributes to Atlantis. The Minoans were an important regional power, not world conquerors. Furthermore, the Minoan civilization didn't disappear entirely with the Thera eruption. While the disaster undoubtedly disrupted trade networks and weakened Minoan society, Crete itself survived and continued for centuries afterward. The palace at Knossos wasn't destroyed by the eruption and continued functioning for some time. The final decline of Minoan civilization came later, possibly due to conquest by Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland, earthquakes, or complex social and economic factors. It was a gradual fade, rather than the instantaneous apocalypse Plato describes. And of course, there's the fundamental problem that Plato might have been inventing the entire story for philosophical purposes, with no historical basis whatsoever. If Atlantis is fiction, then seeking real-world correlates becomes an exercise in creative interpretation, seeing patterns where none exist. Yet the Santorini hypothesis persists and continues to attract supporters. In recent years, new excavations at Akrotiri, protected now by state-of-the-art roofing to prevent further degradation, have uncovered additional treasures, exquisite pottery, shell ornaments, and more frescoes. Each discovery reinforces the image of a wealthy, sophisticated society that met a catastrophic end. The Lost Atlantis experience, an interactive museum on Santorini, explores the connection between the Minoan eruption and Plato's myth, drawing thousands of visitors annually. Documentaries, articles, and books continue examining the Santorini-Atlantis hypothesis from every angle. The emotional appeal is undeniable. Here is a real lost civilization, preserved beneath ash, revealing its secrets to patient archaeologists. Unlike the purely speculative Atlantis locations we'll explore next, Santorini offers something tangible. Ruins you can walk through, frescoes you can gaze upon, pottery you can study. It satisfies our desire for Atlantis to be real while remaining within the bounds of respectable archaeology. Perhaps that's the theory's greatest strength and weakness. It gives us an Atlantis we can touch, but in doing so, it becomes something smaller and more mundane than Plato's vision. The Minoan eruption was tragic and historically significant, but it was a regional disaster, not the fall of a world power. Akrotiri was a prosperous town, but it wasn't the jewel of a global empire. The fit between Plato's story and Santorini's reality is imperfect at best. Yet, imperfect fits haven't stopped other theories from flourishing. If anything, the Santorini hypothesis is one of the more plausible proposals. As we'll see next, the search for Atlantis has led explorers to every corner of the globe, to places far stranger and less likely than a volcanic island in the Aegean Sea. Some theories border on the ridiculous. Others possess their own compelling logic. All reflect the human need to locate Atlantis somewhere, anywhere, rather than accepting that it might exist nowhere at all.
A world of candidates. The global search. The hunt for Atlantis has transformed the entire planet into a treasure map, with explorers drawn X marks over dozens of locations across every inhabited continent, and several uninhabited ones. Some theories possess scholarly credentials, supported by archaeological evidence and geological analysis. Others emerge from speculation, wishful thinking, or deliberate fraud. Together, they demonstrate humanity's creative determination to find what we're seeking, even when the evidence doesn't quite support the conclusion. Let's begin in the most literal location suggested by Plato, the Atlantic Ocean itself, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. Multiple theories place Atlantis somewhere in these waters, from shallow submarine platforms to mid-ocean ridges to island chains that might once have formed a larger landmass. The Azores archipelago, roughly 900 miles west of Portugal, has attracted particular attention. These volcanic islands sit atop the mid-Atlantic ridge,
where tectonic plates diverge and new oceanic crust forms. Proponents note that the islands could be peaks of a sunken continent, with the rest lying beneath the Atlantic waters. Geological surveys have identified underwater formations around the Azores that some interpret as evidence of ancient construction, though mainstream geologists identify them as natural volcanic features. The problem with the Azores theory, like most Atlantic locations, is that geology contradicts it. The Atlantic Ocean floor is relatively young in geological terms, continually being created at mid-ocean ridges and subducted at ocean margins. No evidence suggests a massive landmass existed in the Atlantic that subsequently sank. The ocean floor's age can be determined through magnetic striping and radiometric dating, and these methods confirm that no ancient continent once occupied this space. The Azores themselves are recent volcanic formations, not remnants of a lost civilization. Nevertheless, the Azores theory proved influential during the Renaissance and early modern period, when Europeans first seriously explored the Atlantic. The islands were discovered by Portuguese navigators in the 15th century, and speculation immediately arose about their possible connection to ancient legends. By the 19th century, Atlantis had become firmly associated with the Atlantic, and the Azores were prime candidates. Moving south, some theories propose locations off the coast of Morocco or Mauritania, where the continental shelf extends further from shore. The advantage of these locations is that they're closer to the Strait of Gibraltar, matching Plato's description of Atlantis being beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Shallow submarine plateaus here could theoretically have supported land during periods of lower sea level, though, again, geological evidence doesn't support a major landmass sinking in this region during human-inhabited times. Other Atlantic theories become more speculative. Some place Atlantis off the coast of the Americas, suggesting either that Plato's description anticipated the European discovery of the New World, or that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge of transatlantic geography. The Bahamas, with their shallow banks and mysterious underwater formations like the Bimini Road, have attracted Atlantis hunters. The Bimini Road, discovered in 1968, consists of rectangular blocks that some claim are paved streets from an ancient city. Geologists, however, identify them as naturally fractured beach rock, formations that occur commonly in the region. Antarctica presents one of the most exotic Atlantis theories. Proponents point to the hypothesis that Antarctica was ice-free in the ancient past and might have hosted civilization before glaciation. The theory gained renewed interest with the publication of Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings by Charles Hapgood, which suggested that some medieval and Renaissance maps showed Antarctica's coastline as it would appear without ice, implying ancient knowledge. The Antarctica-Atlantis theory faces insurmountable problems. Antarctica has been ice-covered for millions of years, far longer than humans have existed as a species. The last time the continent was substantially ice-free was during the age of dinosaurs. No archaeological evidence whatsoever suggests human habitation of Antarctica before modern exploration. The maps Hapgood analyzed can be explained through the cartographic conventions of the time and don't require lost ancient knowledge. Yet perhaps the most locations have been proposed within the Mediterranean itself, despite Plato's clear statement that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Aside from Santorini, candidates include the southern coast of Spain and the Strait of Gibraltar region itself. Some theories suggest that Atlantis was located on land that is now submerged in the strait or in marshlands near Gibraltar. The advantage is proximity to the Pillars of Hercules,
And there are archaeological sites in southern Iberia showing advanced Bronze Age culture. The civilization of Tartessos, mentioned in ancient sources but not yet definitively located, sometimes gets identified with Atlantis.
Sardinia, the large Italian island in the western Mediterranean, has its advocates. The island has impressive Bronze Age ruins called nuraghi, stone towers of sophisticated construction that demonstrate an advanced indigenous culture. Some theorists point to Sardinia's geography, which includes a large fertile plain, as matching Plato's descriptions. The challenges include the scale mismatch and the fact that Sardinia never sank. Cyprus, the eastern Mediterranean island, appears in some Atlantis literature, particularly theories connecting the myth to Bronze Age copper trade. Cyprus was a major source of copper in antiquity, and the island's name may derive from the Greek word for copper. However, like Sardinia, Cyprus has remained continuously above water and never suffered the catastrophic destruction Plato describes. The Black Sea has attracted attention, particularly after marine archaeologist Robert Ballard, famous for discovering the Titanic, led expeditions exploring underwater archaeological sites there. Ballard and others have documented evidence supporting the hypothesis that the Black Sea was once a much smaller freshwater lake that was catastrophically flooded around 5600 BCE when rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosporus, the narrow strait connecting the two bodies of water. This flooding event, if it occurred as hypothesized, would have been dramatic from a human perspective, inundating coastal settlements and expanding the sea's boundaries rapidly. Could memories of this disaster have contributed to flood myths, including possibly the Atlantis story? It's an intriguing possibility, though the chronology creates problems. The Black Sea flood occurred thousands of years before the Bronze Age civilizations that might have transmitted the story to the Greeks. Ballard himself has expressed skepticism about Atlantis as a historical reality, noting that the story's logical connection to real catastrophic floods and volcanic eruptions doesn't necessarily mean Plato was recording history. He has observed that no Nobel laureates have confirmed Atlantis's existence, though this argument is somewhat circular, Nobel Prizes not being awarded for history or archaeology. Ballard's position reflects the scientific mainstream. Catastrophic floods and volcanic eruptions certainly occurred throughout history, but that doesn't make Atlantis real. Beyond these theories grounded in some archaeological or geological reasoning, fringe proposals place Atlantis in truly improbable locations. The Caribbean, the North Sea, the Pacific Ocean, even Antarctica's interior beneath miles of ice, all have their proponents. Some New Age theories suggest Atlantis existed on a different plane of reality or utilized technology so advanced it left no trace. These speculations depart entirely from historical or archaeological methodology and enter the realm of pure imagination. What unites all these theories, legitimate and otherwise, is the assumption that Atlantis must be found somewhere. The idea that Plato invented the entire story for philosophical purposes, that no real location corresponds to his description, seems psychologically unbearable to many. We need Atlantis to be real, to be discoverable, to offer up its secrets if we just search diligently enough. This need reflects something deep in human nature. We're pattern-seeking creatures, wired to find connections and construct explanations. When presented with a mystery, we feel compelled to solve it. The idea that some questions have no answers, that some stories are just stories, conflicts with our desire for closure and comprehension. Moreover, finding Atlantis would mean something beyond mere archaeological discovery. It would validate the ancients' knowledge, demonstrate that great civilizations can rise and fall, leaving almost no trace, and perhaps offer warnings or wisdom relevant to our own age. Atlantis has become more than a lost city. It's a symbol of all lost possibilities, all knowledge that vanished, all the ways human achievement can be erased by time and catastrophe. The persistence of Atlantis theories also reveals our complicated relationship with authority and expertise. Many Atlantis hunters position themselves as brave mavericks, challenging academic orthodoxy, suggesting that mainstream archaeologists ignore evidence because it doesn't fit their preconceptions. This dynamic appeals to a widespread skepticism of institutional knowledge and a romantic attachment to the idea of hidden truths waiting for independent thinkers to uncover. Yet academic caution has good reasons. Archaeologists and historians have seen countless lost civilization claims evaporate under scrutiny. Countless mysterious artifacts turn out to be natural formations or modern forgeries. The discipline develops skepticism not from closed-mindedness, but from hard experience with how often initial excitement turns to disappointment. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and evidence for Atlantis's physical existence remains absent. This doesn't mean the search is pointless or that all theories deserve equal dismissal. The careful study of Bronze Age civilizations, catastrophic eruptions, and ancient migrations has genuine value, even when it doesn't lead to Atlantis. The Santorini excavations have enormously enriched our understanding of Minoan culture. Ballard's Black Sea research has illuminated ancient maritime activity and prehistoric flooding events. The investigation of Tartessos and other enigmatic ancient societies continues yielding important historical insights. The problem comes when the search for Atlantis becomes unfalsifiable, when every piece of contrary evidence gets dismissed or reinterpreted, when the theory becomes immune to disproof. At that point, we've left history and entered mythology. Not mythology in the ancient sense, but modern mythology, a belief system maintained despite evidence, rather than because of it. Perhaps the healthiest approach recognizes that we'll almost certainly never find Atlantis because there's nothing to find, while still appreciating the value of the search itself. The quest has inspired oceanographic exploration, archaeological research, and geological investigation. It has captivated imaginations and sparked curiosity about the ancient world. These outcomes have worth independent of whether Atlantis existed. And in truth, we have found lost civilizations, places that were forgotten and then rediscovered, cities that emerged from jungle and desert to astonish the modern world. These real discoveries, which we'll explore later, arguably surpass anything Plato described. But first, we need to understand how the search for Atlantis has continued into the modern era, using technologies Plato couldn't have imagined, yielding results that are simultaneously more precise and more frustrating than anything possible in earlier centuries.
Modern expeditions, technology, and the eternal hunt. In 1985, Robert Ballard stood in the control room of the research vessel Nor, watching video feeds from a remotely operated underwater vehicle called Argo as it scanned the dark Atlantic seafloor 2.5 miles below. On September 1st, objects began appearing on the screens. Debris scattered across the bottom. Then a massive boiler. And finally, the unmistakable profile of a ship's hull, split in two but still recognizable. Ballard had found the Titanic, the most famous shipwreck in history, ending a search that had eluded explorers for 73 years. The discovery made Ballard a celebrity and vindicated his approach to underwater archaeology, using advanced robotics, sonar mapping, and video technology instead of expensive and dangerous manned submersibles for initial surveys. The techniques he pioneered have since revolutionized oceanographic exploration, making it possible to search vast areas of seafloor with unprecedented detail. Ballard's success inspired renewed interest in underwater searches for lost civilizations, including Atlantis. If the Titanic could be found at extreme depths after decades of failed searches, couldn't other legendary sites be discovered with sufficient technology and determination? The answer, frustratingly, has been both yes and no. Modern underwater archaeology has indeed revealed remarkable discoveries. Ballard himself later explored the Black Sea, finding extraordinarily well-preserved ancient shipwrecks in the oxygen-free deep waters. Teams have mapped submerged cities in the Mediterranean, discovering harbor works, buildings, and artifacts from civilizations long forgotten. Satellite imagery and sophisticated sonar have revealed underwater structures invisible from the surface, some resembling roads, walls, or foundations. Yet none of these discoveries has proven to be Atlantis. Many turn out to be natural geological formations misinterpreted as artificial structures. Others are legitimate archaeological sites from known historical periods, expanding our understanding of ancient maritime cultures without requiring lost continents or mysterious vanished empires. The ocean floor, it turns out, contains abundant evidence of human activity. Coastal settlements submerged by rising seas, ships lost to storms and warfare. But this rich archaeological record doesn't include Atlantis. The technology available today for underwater exploration would astound Plato. Multi-beam sonar creates detailed three-dimensional maps of the seafloor, revealing topography with remarkable resolution. Side-scan sonar generates images of underwater terrain and objects. Magnetometers detect iron and other metals, helping locate shipwrecks and artifacts. Remotely operated vehicles, equipped with high-definition cameras, can explore depths humans could never reach in person, bringing back images of abyssal landscapes never before seen. Satellite technology adds another dimension to the search. Infrared and multispectral imaging can detect subtle variations in sea surface temperature and color that indicate underwater features. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, can penetrate water to map coastal regions with extraordinary precision. Geographic information systems allow researchers to layer different types of data, spotting patterns and anomalies that might indicate archaeological sites. Amateur Atlantis hunters have enthusiastically embraced these tools. Google Earth, which provides satellite imagery accessible to anyone with internet connection, has sparked numerous discoveries of underwater formations claimed to be Atlantis. Rectangular patterns off the coast of Africa, circular formations in the ocean, linear features that might be roads or walls, all have been identified and championed by enthusiasts as proof of the lost civilization. Inevitably, follow-up investigation reveals mundane explanations. The rectangular patterns are artifacts of the sonar mapping process, areas where different surveys overlap, creating grid-like appearances. The circular formations are natural geological features, underwater volcanoes or sediment deposits. The linear features are ridges, faults, or naturally aligned rock formations. Google Earth, powerful as it is, requires expert interpretation. Without understanding what you're looking at, it's easy to see structures where none exist. Professional archaeologists approach underwater sites more cautiously and with better results. The excavation of Akrotiri on Santorini continues to reveal more of the buried city, with each season bringing new discoveries protected under sophisticated climate-controlled shelters. The work is painstaking, taking decades to uncover and properly document a site that was buried in a single day. This patience, this careful methodology, characterizes serious archaeology. Other underwater archaeological projects similarly demonstrate what's possible with modern technology applied rigorously. Off the coast of Alexandria, Egypt, divers have explored the submerged remnants of ancient harbor districts, finding statues, columns, and building foundations from Cleopatra's time. The work requires careful mapping, conservation of fragile artifacts, and interpretation that distinguishes between earthquake damage, sea level rise, and other factors that deposited structures underwater. In the Caribbean, marine archaeologists study pre-Columbian settlements submerged by sea level changes and land subsidence, revealing information about indigenous cultures before European contact. In the North Sea, surveys have documented submerged landscapes from when Britain was still connected to continental Europe, finding Stone Age tools and evidence of human habitation in areas now underwater. These discoveries demonstrate that lost civilizations, in a sense, do exist. Human settlements have been submerged and cultures forgotten. But they don't match Plato's Atlantis in scale, geography, or chronology. They're fascinating in their own right, expanding historical knowledge without requiring mysterious global empires or catastrophic single-day destruction. The frustration for Atlantis seekers is that better technology has made the absence of evidence more definitive. We can now survey the ocean floor with such detail that large sunken cities, if they existed in accessible waters, would be obvious. The Atlantic seafloor has been extensively mapped. The Mediterranean has been studied for decades. The waters around every proposed Atlantis location have been surveyed. And while these surveys have found plenty of archaeological material, none of it matches Plato's description. This creates a dilemma for Atlantis believers. Either the location theories are wrong and Atlantis lies somewhere not yet searched, or Atlantis was so thoroughly destroyed that no recognizable traces remain, or the story was never historical in the first place. As search areas get eliminated, the remaining possibilities shrink. The Atlantic mid-ocean regions are too deep and geologically young. The accessible shallow waters have been surveyed. Where's left to look? Some theorists respond by moving the goalposts, suggesting Atlantis existed in such remote antiquity that tectonic activity has erased all traces, or that the civilization was so advanced it used materials that don't preserve, or that the evidence is being deliberately suppressed by authorities with unknown motives. These responses shift Atlantis from archaeology into conspiracy theory, a realm where evidence becomes irrelevant because its absence proves the conspiracy's effectiveness. The Ocean Exploration Trust, founded by Robert Ballard, continues pushing the boundaries of underwater research. Using the exploration vessel Nautilus, equipped with remotely operated vehicles, telepresence technology, and sophisticated imaging systems, the team explores deep ocean environments, making discoveries about marine biology, geology, and occasional archaeological finds. The technology allows scientists on shore to participate in real-time exploration, watching video feeds and directing underwater vehicles from thousands of miles away. This represents the cutting edge of ocean exploration, the capacities that previous generations could only dream of. And yet, for all this technology, for all this searching, Atlantis remains undiscovered. At what point does continued searching become quixotic, pursuing something that isn't there? At what point do we accept absence of evidence, especially with such sophisticated search capabilities, constitutes evidence of absence? The question is complicated by Atlantis's cultural importance. It's not just an archaeological puzzle, but a symbol, an idea that captures imagination in ways that proven ancient cities rarely do. We have extensive ruins from Troy, Pompeii, Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu, dozens of magnificent ancient sites, but Atlantis, which may never have existed, attracts more popular interest than any of them. Why? Part of the answer lies in mystery itself. The unknown exerts a powerful psychological pull. Solved mysteries, even if the solutions are remarkable, lose some of their allure once the answers are known. Atlantis, forever undiscovered, remains perpetually fascinating. It can be whatever we want it to be, a warning, an inspiration, a treasure waiting to be claimed. Atlantis also benefits from perfect narrative structure. It rose to glory, fell to corruption, and was destroyed by divine judgment. That arc speaks to fundamental human concerns about success, hubris, and mortality. It's a complete story, even unfinished, with beginning, middle, and a powerfully imagined, if not fully described, end. And perhaps most importantly, Atlantis represents possibility. If such a civilization could exist and vanish, almost without trace, what else might be possible? What other secrets does the Earth hold? The search for Atlantis becomes, in this reading, a search for wonder itself, for proof that the world is more mysterious, more full of hidden truths than mundane reality suggests. This brings us to Atlantis's life in popular imagination, its transformation into cultural icon, transcending Plato's original story. Because while archaeologists haven't found the island, artists, writers, filmmakers, and dreamers have visited it countless times, bringing back reports that shape how millions envisioned this legendary place. Atlantis in popular imagination, the life of a legend. The cultural life of Atlantis dwarfs its historical existence, assuming it had any historical existence at all. From medieval manuscripts to modern cinema, from serious philosophical treatises to comic books, from occult teachings to Disney animations, Atlantis has been reimagined, reinterpreted, and reinvented countless times. Each generation creates the Atlantis it needs, projecting contemporary concerns onto the ancient legend. In the Middle Ages, when Plato's full works were largely unavailable in Western Europe, Atlantis nearly vanished from European consciousness. Only the Timaeus circulated widely in partial Latin translation, and while it mentioned Atlantis, the detailed description in the never-completed Critias remained unknown. Medieval scholars occasionally referenced the legend, but it occupied no central place in the period's imagination. The Renaissance changed everything. As Greek manuscripts reached Western Europe and scholars rediscovered ancient philosophy, Plato's complete dialogues became available. Atlantis entered humanist discourse, debated by scholars trying to reconcile ancient wisdom with Christian theology and emerging scientific understanding. Some dismissed it as philosophical allegory. Others sought to locate it geographically, integrating it into expanding maps of a world Europeans were just beginning to explore globally. The Age of Exploration provided new impetus to Atlantis speculation. When Europeans discovered the Americas, some immediately proposed connections to Plato's lost continent. Perhaps Atlantis had been the Americas all along, or perhaps indigenous American civilizations were Atlantean colonies. These theories, while lacking evidence, reflected European attempts to understand the unexpected existence of vast lands and sophisticated civilizations unknown to classical geography. Francis Bacon's 1626 novel, The New Atlantis, imagined a utopian society on an island in the Pacific, explicitly framing it as a successor to or remnant of Plato's Atlantis. Bacon used the setting to explore his vision of ideal science and society, continuing Plato's tradition of using Atlantis as a vehicle for philosophical speculation. The work influenced later utopian literature and reinforced Atlantis's association with advanced knowledge and lost wisdom. In the 19th century, Atlantis took on new dimensions through the work of Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman and writer who published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World in 1882. Donnelly's book, enormously popular despite lacking scholarly rigor, argued that Atlantis was real, that it had been a powerful civilization whose destruction was remembered in flood myths worldwide, and that it was the source of various ancient technologies and cultural achievements. Donnelly's Atlantis served as a common origin point for civilizations on both sides of the Atlantic, explaining similarities between Old and New World cultures through diffusion from a central source. The theory appealed to Victorian fascination with progress and decline, suggesting that humanity had once achieved great heights, fallen, and was now climbing back toward lost glory. While professional historians rejected Donnelly's arguments, his book shaped popular understanding of Atlantis for generations. The Theosophical movement, founded by Helena Blavatsky in the late 19th century, incorporated Atlantis into its elaborate cosmology. Blavatsky claimed access to secret ancient wisdom and described Atlantis as one of several root races in human spiritual evolution. Her followers elaborated extensively on Atlantean history, technology, and spiritual practices, creating a detailed alternative history with no basis in evidence but considerable influence on New Age thought. These occult traditions presented Atlantis as possessing advanced technology, including crystals for power generation, aircraft, and other anachronistic devices. Atlanteans were depicted as spiritually evolved beings whose corruption led to their downfall, a morality tale about misusing spiritual power. These ideas, while historically baseless, proved remarkably persistent, influencing countless later works. The 20th century brought Atlantis fully into popular culture. Literature embraced the legend. H.P. Lovecraft incorporated Atlantean themes into his cosmic horror fiction. Science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke explored Atlantis in novels blending speculation with scientific knowledge. Fantasy authors from Robert E. Howard to Marion Zimmer Bradley used Atlantean settings for adventures combining ancient history with imagination. Film and television discovered Atlantis as an irresistible setting. From early silent films to lavish modern productions, Atlantis has been depicted countless times. Disney's 2001 animated film, Atlantis: The Lost Empire, introduced the legend to a new generation, imagining an Atlantean civilization surviving hidden beneath the ocean, protected by technology and magic. The film, while not historically concerned, captured Atlantis's essential appeal: the romance of discovery, the tragedy of fallen glory, the hope that wonders still exist in unexplored places. Television series have similarly explored Atlantis repeatedly. Stargate Atlantis transported the legend to science fiction, imagining Atlantis as an advanced city built by aliens in another galaxy. The show ran for 5 seasons, demonstrating sustained audience interest in Atlantean themes, even when completely divorced from historical claims. Other series, from animated shows to documentaries to pseudo-documentaries, have kept Atlantis in public consciousness. Video games have embraced Atlantis enthusiastically. Assassin's Creed Odyssey includes the Fate of Atlantis expansion, allowing players to explore a fantasy version of the legendary city. Numerous other games use Atlantean settings, from strategy games where players build or discover the civilization to adventure games exploring its ruins. The interactive medium lets people virtually visit Atlantis, walking its streets and experiencing its wonders, even if only digitally. This proliferation of Atlantean content in popular culture serves multiple functions. It satisfies our desire for wonder and mystery in an increasingly mapped and explained world. It provides a familiar shorthand for advanced ancient civilization, allowing storytellers to skip exposition and dive into adventure. It offers a morality tale about hubris and environmental destruction that resonates with contemporary concerns. Significantly, popular Atlantis has largely separated from Plato's original story. Most people's mental image of Atlantis derives from movies, games, and novels rather than reading the Timaeus and Critias. This matters because popular Atlantis often includes elements Plato never mentioned: crystals, flying machines, mystical powers, alien connections. The legend has evolved far beyond its source, becoming a modern myth as much as an ancient one. This evolution demonstrates mythology's living nature. Myths aren't static texts preserved unchanged, but living traditions that adapt to new contexts and needs. Atlantis means something different to each generation, reflecting changing hopes, fears, and fantasies. For Plato, it was a philosophical illustration. For Renaissance explorers, it was a geographical puzzle. For Victorians, it was a lost golden age. For us, it's a symbol of ecological warning, technological possibility, and the mysteries that still elude our understanding. The enduring popularity of Atlantis in popular culture also reveals something about what we've lost and what we're seeking. In an age of satellite surveillance and global connectivity, when virtually every square mile of Earth's surface has been photographed and mapped, the idea of lost civilizations offers escape from a world that feels thoroughly known. Atlantis represents blank spaces on the map, places where anything might still be possible. But this raises a deeper question. Why do we need lost civilizations? What purpose do they serve in our psychological and cultural lives? And what does our endless fascination with Atlantis reveal about human nature, our relationship with history, and our hopes for the future? These questions take us beyond archaeology into philosophy, psychology, and the very nature of how we construct meaning.
What Atlantis reveals about us.
The search for Atlantis tells us far more about ourselves than about the ancient world. Our obsession with this possibly fictional island reveals fundamental aspects of human psychology, our relationship with time, our need for meaning, and our complicated feelings about progress, decline, and the fragility of civilization. Begin with the appeal of lost golden ages. Humans across cultures and eras have imagined better times in the distant past, periods when people lived longer, possessed greater wisdom, enjoyed closer communion with divine powers, or created works surpassing anything achievable in the present. The biblical Eden, the Greek Golden Age, the Hindu Satya Yuga, the Chinese Zhou dynasty as idealized by Confucius all reflect this pattern. This nostalgia for imagined past glory serves several psychological functions. It provides standards by which to judge the present critically, highlighting contemporary society's failures and corruptions. It suggests that human potential exceeds our current condition, that we're capable of better if we can reclaim lost wisdom or virtue. And it offers comfort in difficult times. Things were once better, which means they could be better again. Atlantis perfectly embodies this pattern. Plato's description emphasizes the Atlanteans' initial virtue, their obedience to divine law, their prosperity achieved through righteousness rather than conquest. Only later do they fall into corruption, setting up the moral lesson about hubris and divine punishment. The story's structure teaches that greatness requires virtue, that material success without moral foundation leads to destruction. This message resonates across time because every generation faces similar temptations and dangers. We accumulate wealth and power, grow comfortable and complacent, begin to believe ourselves special or invulnerable, and risk catastrophic misjudgment. Atlantis warns that no civilization, however advanced or powerful, is immune to collapse. Pride precedes the fall, whether for individuals or entire societies. The environmental reading of Atlantis has gained prominence in recent decades. The story of a great civilization destroyed by natural catastrophe speaks directly to contemporary fears about climate change, resource depletion, and ecological collapse. We see ourselves in the Atlanteans, blessed with prosperity, growing arrogant and exploitative, heading towards self-inflicted disaster unless we change course. This interpretation isn't entirely modern. The story always contained warnings about human overreach and divine limits to acceptable behavior. But our ecological context makes these elements particularly salient. When Plato describes the gods becoming angry at Atlantean corruption, we might translate this into ecological terms. Nature has limits, and civilizations that exceed those limits face consequences. The ocean swallowing Atlantis becomes a metaphor for environmental feedback loops overwhelming human control. Yet Atlantis also embodies more hopeful themes. The sheer magnificence of Plato's description inspires awe. The concentric rings, the elaborate engineering, the golden temple all speak to human creative and technical capability at its highest expression. Even if the Atlanteans ultimately failed morally, their achievements were extraordinary. This reminds us of human potential, of what we can accomplish when we combine intelligence, resources, and sustained effort. The mystery itself holds appeal. In an age of information overload, when answers to most questions are seconds away through internet searches, genuine mysteries become precious. Atlantis offers a puzzle that cannot be solved by simply consulting Wikipedia. It requires judgment, interpretation, weighing of evidence, tolerance for ambiguity. These are skills that shallow internet browsing doesn't develop, but that deeper inquiry demands.
The search for Atlantis also reflects our relationship with authority and expertise. Many Atlantis theories position themselves against academic consensus, suggesting that mainstream scholars are hidebound, dismissive of evidence, or even deliberately suppressing the truth. This anti-institutional stance appeals to widespread suspicion of experts and elite knowledge keepers.
There's something democratic about rejecting expert consensus in favor of personal research and judgment. It suggests the truth is accessible to anyone willing to investigate, that credentials aren't necessary for insight, and that the amateur with fresh eyes might see what professionals have missed. These aren't entirely wrong sentiments. Experts can develop blind spots, and occasionally outsiders do make important discoveries. But the Atlantis case demonstrates the limitations of this approach. The absence of evidence for Atlantis isn't the result of scholarly bias, but of thorough, systematic investigation using rigorous methods. When experts say Atlantis hasn't been found, they're not suppressing evidence. They're reporting the results of extensive searches that have turned up nothing matching Plato's description. Rejecting this conclusion requires either proposing that evidence exists in unsearched locations or abandoning falsifiability entirely. The persistence of Atlantis belief, despite lack of evidence, also illuminates how narrative and emotion can override factual analysis. A good story feels true even when it isn't. Plato's account possesses narrative power that mere historical reports often lack. It has heroes and villains, rise and fall, divine intervention, and tragic ending. We want it to be true because it's such a satisfying story, and that wanting influences how we evaluate evidence. This isn't unique to Atlantis. Humans routinely believe things not because evidence supports them, but because they fit desired narratives, confirm existing worldviews, or satisfy emotional needs. Recognizing this tendency in ourselves is difficult. We're convinced our beliefs follow from careful reasoning, rather than from less rational processes. Studying Atlantis belief can teach us about our own cognitive biases if we're willing to look honestly. The quest for Atlantis also reflects our complicated relationship with science and technology. On one hand, we deploy sophisticated archaeological methods and advanced technology in the search, trusting scientific instruments to reveal hidden truths. On the other hand, many Atlantis theories reject scientific consensus about geology, chronology, and archaeological interpretation when it contradicts desired conclusions. This tension appears throughout modern culture, simultaneous trust and distrust of science, selective acceptance of scientific findings based on whether they support or challenge preferred beliefs. We're comfortable with science when it provides useful tools, but resistant when it constrains possibilities or contradicts cherished ideas. Atlantis becomes a battleground for these larger conflicts about who has authority to determine truth and what counts as legitimate evidence. Perhaps most fundamentally, Atlantis speaks to our awareness of civilizational fragility. We know, intellectually and emotionally, that everything we've built could vanish. Cities can be destroyed, knowledge can be lost, entire civilizations can collapse, leaving only fragmentary ruins that later ages struggled to interpret. This knowledge, always present in human consciousness, but especially vivid in our era of existential threats, finds expression in the Atlantis story. If Atlantis, blessed by gods and possessing incredible wealth and technology, could be destroyed utterly in a day and might, what hope do we have? The story simultaneously warns and comforts. Warns that we're vulnerable, comforts that collapse has happened before and life continued. Humanity survived the loss of Atlantis, whether real or imaginary, and could survive similar catastrophes again. The environmental message particularly resonates now. As we face climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion, the image of a great civilization destroyed by forces it unleashed or ignored feels less like ancient history and more like contemporary warning. The ocean swallowing Atlantis evokes rising seas drowning coastal cities, a threat that feels very present as we watch ice caps melt and shorelines erode. Yet, focusing entirely on catastrophe risks missing another element of the Atlantis story: the possibility of preservation and rediscovery. Even destroyed civilizations leave traces. Even forgotten knowledge can be recovered. The archaeological enterprise itself embodies this hope, patiently excavating, documenting, and interpreting the remnants of past lives. Every recovered text, every excavated city, every deciphered script represents a small victory against oblivion. This brings us to an important realization. We have found lost civilizations, many of them. Places that were forgotten and then rediscovered. Cultures that vanished from memory and then returned to awareness. These real discoveries, in some ways, exceed anything Plato described. They demonstrate that the romance of Atlantis, the thrill of uncovering hidden history, doesn't require mystical lost continents. The actual past is extraordinary enough.
Lost and found. Real civilizations we've rediscovered. While Atlantis remains elusive, archaeology has rediscovered numerous civilizations that were genuinely lost to history, forgotten for centuries or millennia, and then brought back to light through patient excavation and scholarship. These real lost civilizations offer everything that makes Atlantis appealing: advanced societies, mysterious disappearances, dramatic discoveries, with the considerable advantage of being provably real. Consider Troy. For centuries, Homer's Iliad was considered pure legend, a poet's invention of a war that never happened over a city that never existed. The descriptions seemed too fantastical, too heroic, too removed from historical reality to be anything but fiction. Then, in the 1870s, German businessman and amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, convinced that Homer's details contained actual geographical information, excavated a hill in northwestern Turkey called Hisarlik. There he found not one city, but multiple cities layered atop each other, spanning thousands of years of occupation. Schliemann's methods were crude by modern standards. He dug through later layers to reach what he believed was Homeric Troy, destroying valuable archaeological context in his eagerness. But he proved the fundamental point: Troy was real. A wealthy, fortified city had stood exactly where Homer's poems placed it. A city that had been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. A city that controlled strategically important trade routes between the Aegean and Black Seas. Later, more careful excavations revealed the site's full complexity. Troy existed as a significant Bronze Age center, contemporary with Mycenae and Greece. Evidence suggests violent destruction of one of the cities, possibly corresponding to the legendary war, though linking specific archaeological layers to specific mythical events remains contentious. Still, the basic vindication of Homer's geographical knowledge and the existence of a great city where legend placed it captured public imagination. The discovery taught important lessons. Legends can preserve genuine historical information even when heavily embroidered with mythical elements. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially for ancient sites not yet excavated. And persistence based on careful reading of sources can sometimes succeed where skepticism would abandon the search. Pompeii offers a different kind of recovery. The city wasn't lost to history entirely. Romans knew about the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum. But the city's exact locations were forgotten, and their remains lay hidden beneath volcanic deposits for nearly 17 centuries. Excavations beginning in the 18th century revealed an extraordinarily preserved snapshot of Roman life, frozen at the moment of destruction. Pompeii's preservation surpasses almost any other archaeological site. Buildings remain standing, paintings vibrant on walls, food preserved in storage jars, even the imprints of human bodies captured in ash. Archaeologists found election graffiti, tavern menus, household shrines, gladiators' barracks, shops with inventory still on shelves. The completeness of the record provides unprecedented insight into Roman society, economy, religion, and domestic life. Pompeii demonstrates that real archaeological discoveries can match the romance of any legendary site, providing tangible connection to vanished lives and frozen moments of ancient history. Machu Picchu presents yet another narrative of loss and recovery. This Inca city in the Peruvian Andes was never entirely lost. Local people knew about the ruins, but it remained unknown to the outside world until American historian Hiram Bingham publicized it in 1911. The dramatic setting, perched on a mountain ridge surrounded by peaks and river gorges, combined with sophisticated stonework and mysterious purpose, made Machu Picchu instantly famous.
The site's function remains debated. Was it a royal estate, a religious retreat, an administrative center? The lack of written Inca records complicates interpretation, but the sophistication of the architecture, the astronomical alignments of certain structures, and the careful integration of buildings with natural landscape demonstrate advanced engineering and planning. Machu Picchu was built around 1450 CE and abandoned about a century later during the Spanish conquest, escaping the destruction that befell many Inca sites because Spanish conquistadors never found it. The rediscovery sparked intense interest in Inca civilization and Andean archaeology generally, leading to exploration of numerous other sites and deeper understanding of pre-Columbian American societies. It demonstrated that major archaeological sites could still be found in the 20th century, hiding in plain sight in remote locations. Göbekli Tepe, discovered in southeastern Turkey in the 1990s, revolutionized understanding of prehistoric society. This massive complex of stone circles and carved pillars dates to approximately 9600 BCE, making it older than Stonehenge by over 6,000 years, and predating the invention of agriculture, pottery, and even metalworking. The site required sophisticated organization to construct, implying complex social structures earlier than previously thought possible. The discovery challenged assumptions about hunter-gatherer societies' capabilities and the relationship between sedentary agriculture and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe suggests that large-scale ritual and construction projects might have preceded rather than followed the agricultural revolution, inverting the traditional narrative of civilization development. Each excavation season reveals more carved pillars, some depicting animals and abstract symbols whose meanings remain mysterious. The site reminds us that our knowledge of the past remains incomplete. Even major revisions to understanding can occur when new evidence emerges. The archaeological record is fragmentary, and the absence of evidence for particular practices or capabilities doesn't prove they didn't exist. Göbekli Tepe lay hidden for millennia, despite being a massive stone complex. What else might be waiting undiscovered? Angkor Wat and the broader Khmer civilization of Cambodia offer another example of recovery from obscurity. While the temples never entirely disappeared, The jungle reclaimed them after the Khmer Empire's decline, and detailed knowledge of their builders faded. European explorers in the 19th century publicized Angkor's grandeur, leading to archaeological investigation and restoration. The scale of the complex is staggering. Angkor Wat itself, built in the 12th century as a Hindu temple and later converted to Buddhist use, is the largest religious monument in the world. But it's just one structure within a vast urban landscape that once supported a population in the hundreds of thousands. Recent LiDAR surveys revealed extensive hydraulic engineering, road networks, and urban planning far more sophisticated than previously realized. The Khmer achievement demonstrates that civilizations can rise to extraordinary heights, dominate regions for centuries, and then decline dramatically, leaving magnificent ruins that later ages struggle to comprehend. The parallels to Atlantis' narrative of rise and fall are obvious, except the Khmer Empire actually existed, actually built cities that still stand, and actually collapsed through combination of environmental, political, and military factors. These real lost and found civilizations share common themes. They were dismissed as legendary or their significance underestimated until archaeological evidence proved otherwise. Their discoveries required persistence, careful scholarship, and often luck. Once found, they revolutionized understanding of their respective regions and time periods, and they demonstrate conclusively that the past holds surprises, that major discoveries still await, and that the romance of uncovering forgotten history is grounded in genuine possibility. Yet, none of these sites is Atlantis. Troy was a real Bronze Age city, but it never controlled an empire spanning continents or sank beneath the sea. Pompeii was preserved magnificently, but by volcanic eruption covering a single city, not the destruction of an entire civilization. Machu Picchu was abandoned, not destroyed catastrophically. Göbekli Tepe revolutionized prehistory, but dates to the Stone Age, not a technologically advanced Bronze Age empire. The pattern suggests a conclusion. Real lost civilizations exist, can be found, and provide all the excitement of discovery and historical illumination anyone could want. But they don't match Plato's specific description of Atlantis. This leaves us with two possibilities. Either Atlantis hasn't been found yet, or it never existed as described because Plato invented it for philosophical purposes. At this point in our journey, having explored Plato's original account, examined the evidence for historical basis, surveyed proposed locations, considered modern search technology, understood Atlantis' cultural influence, and compared it to real lost civilizations, we're prepared to ask the ultimate question. Does it matter whether Atlantis was real? And what happens if we accept that it probably wasn't?
The truth that doesn't require existence. Imagine accepting for a moment that Atlantis never existed as a physical place, that Plato invented the entire story as a philosophical illustration, that no island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules rose and fell 9,000 years before his time, that the search for archaeological evidence is futile because there's nothing to find. Does this make the story worthless? Does it rob Atlantis of meaning and value? The answer is emphatically no. Stories don't require literal truth to carry profound meaning. The parables of Jesus, the allegories of Plato's cave, the myths of every culture all teach truths without being factually accurate. They use narrative to convey insights that pure philosophy or abstract argument cannot reach as effectively. Atlantis, whether real or invented, communicates ideas about civilization, virtue, hubris, and divine justice that resonate across centuries. The moral structure of the Atlantis story works regardless of historical accuracy. The arc from blessed prosperity through moral corruption to catastrophic destruction teaches timeless lessons. Success without virtue leads to ruin. Power without wisdom breeds tyranny. Hubris invites divine punishment, whether we interpret divine literally as gods or metaphorically as natural consequences and historical forces. These lessons apply as much to modern civilization as to any ancient society. We too possess unprecedented wealth and technological capability. We too face temptations to use our power exploitatively rather than justly. We too risk catastrophe if we ignore ethical constraints and environmental limits. Atlantis serves as a warning, and warnings don't need to be historical to be effective. The story also speaks to human psychology in ways that transcend historical fact. Our fascination with lost civilizations reveals something true about human nature. We're drawn to mystery, nostalgic for imagined golden ages, aware of civilization's fragility, and hungry for connection to the deep past. These psychological truths exist whether or not any specific lost civilization actually rose and fell as legends describe. Moreover, the search for Atlantis, even if ultimately futile, has generated genuine value. The oceanographic exploration, archaeological research, and historical investigation inspired by Atlantis have yielded real discoveries and advanced human knowledge. The excavations at Akrotiri, prompted partly by Atlantis theories, revealed an extraordinary Minoan settlement that enriches understanding of Bronze Age Aegean culture. The mapping of the ocean floor in searches for Atlantis has scientific value, independent of whether the legendary island existed. The cultural creativity inspired by Atlantis also has worth. The novels, films, artworks, and philosophical treatises that Atlantis has generated constitute a rich tradition of human imagination engaging with questions of origin, destiny, and meaning. These creative works have their own reality and impact, inspiring readers and viewers, prompting reflection, providing entertainment and enlightenment. In this sense, Atlantis exists culturally, even if it never existed geographically. It's a real part of human intellectual heritage, a story that has shaped how we think about civilization, history, and our place in the cosmos. The question isn't whether Atlantis is real, but what kind of reality it possesses. As a physical place, probably not. As an idea with tremendous explanatory and inspirational power, absolutely. This realization doesn't diminish the value of archaeological rigor or historical accuracy. We should still distinguish between what we can verify and what we simply wish to believe. The methods of archaeology and history, demanding evidence and rejecting speculation unsupported by data, have proven enormously productive in recovering genuine knowledge about the past. Abandoning these standards would harm human understanding far more than maintaining them does. But we can simultaneously appreciate mythology for what it is: humanity's way of encoding and transmitting ideas, values, and meaning through narrative. Myths aren't failed history, but successful philosophy, psychology, and moral teaching.
They work through different mechanisms than historical narrative, aiming for different truths than factual chronologies.
Plato understood this distinction. His dialogues constantly use myths and allegories to illustrate philosophical points. The myth of urn, the allegory of the cave, the description of the soul's nature, all employ fictional narrative to communicate ideas that abstract argument alone couldn't convey as powerfully. Atlantis fits this pattern perfectly, a story crafted to illustrate Plato's theories about political decline, moral corruption, and divine justice. The contemporary hunger for Atlantis to be historically real perhaps reflects discomfort with ambiguity and metaphorical thinking. We want clear answers, either it existed or it didn't. The possibility that it's simultaneously true and false, that it communicates genuine truths through invented narrative, seems unsatisfying. But this is exactly how mythology works and has always worked. Indigenous peoples worldwide maintain creation stories that aren't scientifically accurate, but carry profound truths about human relationship to land, cosmos, and community. These stories shape identity, transmit values, and organize understanding in ways that scientific cosmology, however accurate, cannot replicate. Dismissing them as false misses their actual function and value. Atlantis deserves similar respect, not as history, but as mythology, as a story that has proven extraordinarily generative and meaningful across cultures and centuries. The question we should ask isn't, did Atlantis exist, but what does the Atlantis story teach us? How has it shaped human thought? Why does it continue resonating? The answers reveal uncomfortable truths. We are attracted to narratives of decline because we fear our own civilization might be declining. We seek lost wisdom because we doubt our current knowledge's adequacy. We imagine ancient catastrophes because we recognize contemporary risks of catastrophe. Atlantis becomes a mirror showing our hopes, fears, and uncertainties. Accepting Atlantis as meaningful mythology rather than recoverable history also frees us to engage with the story more creatively. We don't need to fit every detail into historical plausibility or force geographical correspondences that don't quite work. We can appreciate Plato's narrative craft, the philosophical depths he built into the tale, the way he used a fictional past to comment on his own present and on timeless human patterns. This approach also inoculates us against pseudo-archaeology and pseudo-history that use Atlantis to support dubious claims about ancient advanced civilizations, alien contact, or conspiracies suppressing truth. These narratives gain traction partly by exploiting legitimate uncertainty about Atlantis' reality. Accepting that Plato invented the story for philosophical purposes removes that ambiguity, leaving less room for baseless speculation to flourish. At the same time, maintaining intellectual humility remains important. Our knowledge of the ancient world continues growing. New discoveries repeatedly surprise us, revealing capabilities and achievements we didn't know ancient peoples possessed. The archaeological record is fragmentary, and absence of evidence isn't conclusive proof of absence. So while the specific Atlantis Plato described almost certainly didn't exist, we should remain open to the possibility that he drew inspiration from real events, perhaps catastrophic floods, perhaps conflicts between ancient powers, perhaps stories of cities destroyed by earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. The kernel of truth, if any exists, is probably small and heavily embroidered, but dismissing Plato's account entirely as pure invention might be as mistaken as accepting it as literal history. The wisest position embraces nuance. Atlantis probably wasn't real as Plato described it. The archaeological search has been thorough and unsuccessful. The geography, chronology, and scale create insuperable problems for literal interpretation. But the story carries genuine truth about human nature, civilization's fragility, and the relationship between virtue and survival. These truths don't depend on historical accuracy. They stand on their own merit, needing no validation from excavation or underwater surveys. This understanding allows us to appreciate Atlantis fully, as philosophical teaching, as cultural phenomenon, as inspiration for exploration and creativity, as mirror reflecting our deepest concerns. We can love the story without requiring it to be history, treasure the questions it raises without demanding definitive answers, and find meaning in the search even if the object of search never existed.
Closing reflections. What we're really searching for.
As our journey through Atlantis draws toward conclusion, it's worth reflecting on what this strange, beautiful, frustrating legend ultimately means. Not what it meant to Plato, not what various interpreters have claimed, but what it might mean to you, listening now, wondering why a possibly fictional island commands such enduring fascination. The search for Atlantis is, at its deepest level, a search for meaning in a universe that doesn't automatically provide it. We are pattern-seeking creatures, born into a cosmos that doesn't care about our need for patterns. We tell stories to make sense of existence, to organize chaos into comprehensible narrative, to find or create purpose where none inherently exists. Atlantis represents the ultimate pattern, the perfect story arc: rise, glory, corruption, fall. It satisfies our narrative hunger while simultaneously teaching moral lessons. It provides an explanation for current conditions, a golden age against which to measure the present, and a warning about futures we might face. These functions would work whether or not any such civilization actually existed. The search also reflects yearning for connection with the deep past, for continuity across the vast spans of time that separate us from the earliest humans. We want to know that we're part of a longer story, that our current moment connects to ancient roots, that wisdom and achievement stretch back further than we can easily imagine. Atlantis, placed 9,000 years before Plato, extends human civilization into deep antiquity, making us feel part of something larger and longer than recorded history suggests. There's also the appeal of mystery itself. In an age when information proliferates beyond our capacity to process it, when search engines answer questions in microseconds, genuine mystery becomes precious. Atlantis offers a puzzle that can't be solved by simply consulting databases. It requires judgment, interpretation, weighing of contradictory evidence. It respects our intelligence by refusing easy answers. The environmental dimension of Atlantis resonates particularly now. The image of a great civilization destroyed by forces beyond its control or by consequences of its own actions speaks directly to contemporary climate anxiety. We see ourselves in the Atlanteans, blessed with prosperity and technology, growing complacent and exploitative, risking catastrophic collapse. The story becomes prophetic warning, urging change before it's too late. Yet, Atlantis also embodies hope. Even destroyed civilizations leave traces. Even forgotten knowledge can be recovered. Even after catastrophe, humanity continues. The archaeological enterprise itself demonstrates this resilience, patiently excavating, documenting, and interpreting the remnants of vanished lives. Every recovered text, every excavated city represents a small victory against oblivion. The lesson might be that what we're really searching for isn't a sunken island, but understanding of ourselves, of civilization's possibilities and limits, of how to live well in a world where everything we build might someday vanish. Atlantis forces us to contemplate mortality, not just personal death, but civilizational death, the possibility that everything we consider permanent and important might be erased. This contemplation, uncomfortable as it is, has value. It generates humility,
recognizing that we're not as special or invulnerable as we sometimes imagine. It encourages long-term thinking, considering consequences beyond our individual lifetimes. It highlights what truly matters, not accumulating wealth and power, but cultivating wisdom and virtue, building relationships, creating beauty, seeking truth.
Atlantis also reminds us that the past is foreign country, as the saying goes. Ancient peoples thought differently than we do, valued different things, operated under different assumptions about reality. Trying to understand them requires imagination and empathy, a willingness to step outside our own perspectives. This exercise in historical imagination transfers to understanding different cultures, different individuals, different ways of being human. The ongoing search for Atlantis, even if futile, models persistence and curiosity. These qualities have driven human progress throughout history. The desire to know, to understand, to discover, even when practical benefits aren't obvious, reflects something noble in human nature. We're not content with surface appearances, but compelled to probe deeper, ask questions, seek answers, even when they prove elusive. At the same time, the Atlantis phenomenon warns against letting desire override evidence, against believing things because we want them to be true, rather than because data supports them. This tension between curiosity and skepticism, between openness to possibility and demand for evidence, defines the scientific temperament at its best. We remain open to unexpected discoveries while maintaining standards for what counts as genuine discovery versus wishful thinking. Perhaps the final lesson is that meaning doesn't require literal truth. The stories that shape us, that teach us, that inspire us, work through narrative and symbol as much as through fact. Atlantis matters not because archaeologists will someday excavate its ruins, but because it speaks to something deep in human consciousness, some need for story and meaning that raw fact alone cannot satisfy. In accepting this, we honor both science and mythology, recognizing their different but complementary roles. Science tells us what is, mapping reality with increasing precision. Mythology tells us what things mean, organizing human experience into narratives that guide action and shape identity. Both are necessary. Both are true in their own ways. So, let Atlantis remain mysterious. Let the debate continue about whether Plato meant it as history or allegory. Let the search proceed if it leads to legitimate archaeological discovery, but let it end if it becomes obstacle to clear thinking. Most importantly, let the story continue inspiring us, warning us, teaching us, even if it never yields its ultimate secret. Because the truth is, we don't need Atlantis to exist. We have it already, preserved not beneath Atlantic waters, but in human imagination, a shared story that connects us across centuries and cultures. Every person who has read Plato's account, every explorer who has searched for the lost island, every artist who has imagined its glory, participates in keeping Atlantis alive. It lives in the questions we ask about civilization and its fragility, about human nature and its capacity for both greatness and corruption, about the relationship between material prosperity and moral virtue. It lives in our awareness that everything we build will someday fall, that all civilizations are temporary, that the only things that truly last are stories and the truths they encode. Take a final deep breath. Feel the ground beneath you, solid and real. The Earth doesn't rest on a sunken continent. It follows orbital mechanics through space, part of a cosmos governed by physical law. But the stories we tell about it, the meanings we find or create, those are human contributions, as real as anything archaeology excavates.
Atlantis may never have existed in history, but it exists in you, now, in this moment, as you consider what it represents and what it teaches. That existence, that living presence in human consciousness, is a kind of reality that no amount of ocean floor surveying can touch. And in that sense, Atlantis is real, and always has been, and always will be, as long as human beings tell stories and search for meaning. Now, if this quiet exploration has brought you peace, has stirred wonder, has made you think differently about lost civilizations and the stories we tell ourselves, I would be deeply grateful for a like or subscribe. Your support keeps these nocturnal wanderings alive, allows me to continue crafting these meditations on mystery and meaning. Each gesture reminds me that somewhere out there, thoughtful souls like you are listening, wondering, seeking the same truths I seek. And if you're willing, please share in the comments, where are you right now as you listen to this? What time is it in your corner of the world? And do you believe Atlantis was real? Or does it matter to you whether it was? I love seeing how these stories drift across the globe, connecting us in our shared fascination with the mysteries that endure. Until next time, may you walk gently through the ruins of your own lost cities, the dreams and plans that didn't come to pass. May you build wisely in the present, knowing that everything is temporary, but that the building still matters. And may you keep searching, not for sunken islands, but for the truths that give life meaning, the stories that connect us, and the wonder that makes existence worth living. Sleep well, dear wanderer. Tomorrow, you might discover something extraordinary, or you might not. Either way, the search continues, as it always has, as it always will. And in that continuing search lies all the treasure we'll ever need. Good night.